Parliament has an essential role to play in exercising oversight over what the executive does and over how the executive, the government, commits the Canadian forces. It's really the only avenue that ordinary Canadians have to exercise some measure of control over what the government does and how the government uses the Canadian forces.
Over the past decade, Canada has made significant contributions of troops to UN and NATO operations. We have deployed them and then left their strategy, tactics, and livelihood to other people. We lend them and forget them. So how did Parliament deal with the Kosovo crisis?
When I arrived in Ottawa in September of 1998, we were already very much into the Kosovo crisis. The crisis was building at that point already, and the first Take Note debate was actually only weeks after I arrived. Considering the fact that there were 1,300 Canadian troops on the ground in Bosnia, considering that we had deployed aircraft to participate in potential bombing operations over Kosovo, the level of opportunity that the government gave to Parliament to discuss the issue beforehand was really very, very limited. There was one Take Note debate in October and another Take Note debate in February.
We got out of the government an engagement to have a non-binding, non-voting debate in Parliament at various stages of the Balkans operations. There were 2 or 3 of these. They were always put in the evening and would usually after regular business was finished. So you'd have a house in which perhaps 3 members would be present and the opposition would politely not challenge for lack of a quorum.
The Take Note debates were to fulfill a Liberal campaign promise to consult with Parliament, but politicians didn't seem interested that we might be sending our forces to war. Despite the stakes and risks, only 10% of MPs turned up at these debates, an almost empty house.
Madam Speaker, let me say that tonight we have the opportunity in this Parliament to discuss the situation in 2 troubled spots in 2 different continents, Kosovo and the Central African Republic, and to discuss Canada's contribution in resolving the conflicts faced by these regions and the people in these regions.
I want to first of all remind this House that this debate is not about whether we bomb anybody. It's not about whether we send troops into a conflagration. It's a debate about peacekeeping forces.
90% of members of Parliament hadn't been involved in those particular discussions. And those were just advisory debates in any case. There was no vote taken associated with those debates as to the level of Canadian commitment or Canadian involvement.
But what this Take Note debate does provide is every opportunity to be able to hear different opinions about our involvement, about the issues, the precedent-setting issues that could be involved here.
Many of the government MPs who did attend these Take Note debates couldn't be bothered to make an original contribution. They read from speeches prepared by government bureaucrats.
One of my colleagues mentioned, well, a lot of the Liberals simply just pick up their speeches as they walk into the House. They're sitting there on a table prepared by bureaucrats in the Department of National Defense, and they just pick them up and read them. And I thought that this was quite phenomenal, because theoretically members of Parliament are supposed to be exercising oversight over what the government is doing. But here they are simply reading the speeches that are prepared for them by government bureaucrats. In other words, they are simply a mouthpiece for government policy, and there is no oversight whatsoever.
The whips, offices, and government and opposition supply members with speeches. I made the point, I will read the speeches just to make sure I know what government policy is and I don't get out of line unconsciously. I like to know what it is, but I'm not going to read them. I'm not going to use them. I give my own speeches.
Patrick Boyer was a Conservative MP who became Parliamentary Secretary for Defence and Foreign Affairs during the Mulroney government.
Routinely, speeches that were crafted based on what opinion polls said, based on policy that had already been decided by the government and that was being laid out as the perfect solution to the problem at hand. No doubt, no hesitation, this is the way to accept it, and by the way, backbenchers fall in line and support it.
I filed for Freedom of Information request, requesting notes prepared for members of Parliament for the debate on Kosovo on XX day. And when I received the material, I went through the speeches prepared by Foreign Affairs and Defence bureaucrats and compared them to the speeches that had actually been given by Liberal members of Parliament, and found that some of the Liberal members had simply read the speeches word for word.
I joined this debate to say a number of things, but first and foremost, Mr. Speaker, to speak my mind and what I believe has developed in the course of this century into a proud Canadian tradition of helping others.
While Canada and our partners in the international community do not seek to impose our own solutions, we cannot be neutral to the suffering being experienced and to the threat to international peace and security that is posed by this current crisis.
There would be various paragraphs or modules that you could move around and place, but there were the key messages. And of course, who crafted these? Well, these were speech writers working in concert with opinion pollsters who had pretty much determined where the tolerances were for Canadian public to be receptive to this message.
I remember sitting in committee when Lloyd Axworthy said to the Bloc Québécois member of Parliament, Daniel Turp, "You may not be interested in what members of Parliament have to say, but I am."
We're spending all our time here talking about whether we'll have a vote or not on it. I mean, frankly, let's get down to the substance of it, to be honest.
You know we're interested by substance as well.
Well,
but this is
then
an
ask the
issue of
questions on
substance. Having Parliament have a say, an important say on this. Not only government.
Well,
not only through debates. You know what these debates are. You see what those debates are. I'm frustrated as a parliamentarian who sees what the debates are all about. People getting up, making speeches that could be very interesting, but then it ends. This debate on Monday, you know how it ended. At 8 o'clock, someone stopped the debate and it was all over.
You may have a low opinion of your colleagues' speeches. I happen to...
No, I don't.
I have read those transcripts. I have found them to be extremely helpful. They have given good advice. They have indicated the support for what the government has done so far. When a member of Parliament gets up to his feet or her feet to speak, I respect what they have to say, and I listen very carefully to it. You may disregard it. I don't.
I sort of sat and laughed in my chair because, in fact, many of the members of Parliament are reading exactly what Lloyd Axworthy had told them to say. So, of course, he's interested in what the members of Parliament have to say when they are saying exactly what he told them to say.